This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
Welcome back, Bantwana Benkosi, Bantwana Bahle, Bantwana Begazi. We turn now to the 13th anniversary commemoration remembrance of the Marikana massacre. We pause to remember against forgetting one of the most brutal massacres in South Africa's history, let alone the post-democratic state, where the government of the African National Congress killed workers in Marikana. Workers that were fighting for a minimum wage that at the time was 12,500. We saw them brutalized in the same style, some of them executed, that reminded everybody of the dark days of apartheid. I'm joined on the line by Head of Organisational Development at AMCU, Mr. Van Rensburg. Welcome to Power Talk, sir. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Ndlozi and your listeners.
I'm also joined by SERI Executive Director, Nomzamo Zondo. Welcome to Power Talks, sir. Thanks indeed for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
And the attorney Andries Mngome, who worked a lot with the affected families and workers. Welcome to Power Talk, Andries. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Ndlozi, and good morning to all the Power listeners.
Indeed. Let's start with you, Mr. Van Rensburg. If you could, just break the ice for us about what happened, the events that led to this fateful day, as it were.
Thank you, Dr. Ndlozi. Firstly, my sincere appreciation for the way that you expressed your feelings about this. It shows me that you have true regard for what happened on 16 August and in the days preceding. We tend to face a lot of criticism as AMCU from organizations and people who feel that we must forget about this, that it must be swept under the carpet. And it can never be swept under the carpet. And for that reason, I thank you personally. Also for the way that you've set the tone. It is truly something, a special time of every year that we as AMCU commemorate what happened. And one can never do enough. We try our best to really contextualize and reconstruct the mood and the feeling and the events that happened on that fateful day. It was a very bad situation, It was a perfect storm, one could say, and perhaps at a high level, it's important to remember what happened on this day was seen by many as a betrayal post-apartheid, where you had a black government that came into power with the expectations of the nation that they will have liberation, not only political liberation, but also economic liberation. And the mining sector, as we all know, is a relic of the brutality of colonialism and apartheid, whereby mostly black mine workers were earning pittances. And this storm brewed and brewed and brewed, and Marikana was probably the pressure point that burst. And the most poignant thing is it burst as a result of an email by a senior government official that said there must be concomitant action taken, which then gave the police, if one could use them as bulls in my analogy, the red flag to open fire and kill innocent workers who were merely protesting for decent and living wage. Let me pause there.
And the numbers, as well as I think it's important to restate how many workers died that day, how many were injured, and the resulting pain to both the mining community of Marikana as well as the affected families.
Yes. Yes, indeed. We all know 34 were killed on that day. The injured comrades, I must be honest with you, we meet them every year at the commemoration. Some of them are still visibly injured. I'm sure you've also engaged with some of the more prominent comrades. And it's really heartbreaking that to see how these people's lives have changed. The widows, we know them, we see them every year. Their lives have been changed forever. Their children, as you can imagine, are now, some of them are adults already. And we meet them, we look them in the eye, and one must feel their pain that they have, and that everything changed on that day in their lives. Typically, the mine worker is the only breadwinner in a family, often an extended family. So the fact that this person lost his life also means that the family lost their livelihood. And the stories are actually very tragic. If you go into them in detail, it's truly heart-wrenching.
Andries, I don't know if you want to step in, maybe also the same question, because I think it's of paramount importance, since memory, because of its human nature on the one end, but also in light of the fact that the majority of national attention coincidentally is focused on what's happening at UNISA. I don't know if one should speculate about the choice of the date of the national dialogue, precisely as Mr. van Rensburg says, being an effort to cloud the memorization of the Marikana massacre. I wonder if you would like to add, to highlight some of the brutality, some of the pain that occurred that day.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'll start by agreeing with the perception that says you have described what transpired at Marikana exactly in the same way as it did. It was a travesty that in the hands of a black majority ruling party would have a massacre that is similar to what transpired in South Africa in 1960 during the apartheid days. Now, we today have the symposium that's supposed to be taking place out at UNISA a day prior to the Marikana event. And we also know that promises had been made for visits to Marikana to take place by the current sitting president, who had been fingered in what transpired in Marikana because he described the labor dispute with the then mining company Lonmin as a dastardly criminal act. And it is as a result of that a press briefing was made where the nation was told that tomorrow, the 16th, is D-Day, and we're not going to detail what's going to transpire with the lives of the people that are sitting out at the Kopi.
Ms. Zondo?
Thanks so much to Andres and to Chris. Look, it's always very difficult for us because we represent these 36 families. The majority of them come from the Eastern Cape. And one of the things that I remember is a mother of one of the mine workers reporting how Unkosiabo had called and said, Mama, there are police from Amtata here. And they've told us that Mama Nabasas bin Bazawzila, meaning that your wives and your mothers will grieve. So it isn't just simply an incident that is political. That the police are given the sign to say you can do whatever you need to do. But there was a time before the miners passed away when they were told you're probably going to lose your lives. And for many of them, they had to make a decision about the value of the black life, the value of their labor, insisting on a fair value for that labor. And then having passed that point where you can say, we say it's a massacre, they say it's a tragedy, past that point, having had a color state that since that point has refused to apologize, even today it refuses to apologize, has continuously forced both the families, the 78 miners and the over 200 mine workers to litigate them to the very last point to get any compensation for what they did on that day is a problem. It's even worse because the losses for our clients didn't just end in the people that died on the 13th and the 16th of August, but the losses have continued. The families have buried children. Some of them committed suicide. They've carried sicknesses and illnesses. People have continued to die. They've had continuous losses. And in the face of those losses, they've had a state that continues to treat them as second-class citizens. And they've had to continue to fight to say what happened on the 13th of August and the 16th of August shouldn't have happened. Even to push institutions like the National Prosecuting Authority to do their job.
Mr. van Rensburg, I mean, perhaps we should, as a point of departure, then ask about the general conditions that prevailed before the massacre, the reason the workers took a decision to go on a strike. What had failed in the bargaining system, collective bargaining system on one hand, but also just generally the labor relations?
Yes. Dr. Ngozi, these things are always important to stress. I think the first thing I want to stress is that we've made big strides as AMCU in uplifting the mine workers' living conditions in general, conditions of employment. Let's say the work-related part, the part that we could do something about. You would know the statistics, but in general, the RDO, when we took over there, in the London area, was earning about 6,000 rand. And currently, we can confirm that nobody that goes underground earns less than a basic salary of 18,000, and with all the bonuses and things, over 20,000 rand. So to a large extent, even with inflation, we've done well in addressing the legacy of apartheid and colonialism, as I referred to earlier, in living conditions and working conditions while working. However, one must just visit the Marikana copy area to see the horrid, I almost say municipal status of that area. It is dirty. The roads are not maintained. Like many parts of our country, it doesn't look well there. So that part still needs a lot of attention. But in terms of the collective bargaining processes, we often joke, our president, Mr. Joseph Matunga, often jokes to say that if you take the Labour Relations Act book, you know those books that were printed, the small, what do you call it, the A2 size. And you took one pre-2012 and you take one now, they've almost tripled in thickness. And it tells you, and any person who knows law, I'm sure Andres will also tell us, that the law, the Labour Relations Act, was tightened significantly to try and deal with the issue of industrial relations. So strikes, the issue of picketing rules, the way that collective bargaining takes place has changed drastically. Sometimes, I would say, in a progressive way. One of the progressive things that AMCU brought to the table is the issue of a monetary increase as opposed to a percentile or percentage. And you would know, anybody with basic mathematical skills will understand that a rand increase is more progressive because the people in lower job grades tend to get a more proportionally bigger salary increase. So those kinds of things I think AMCU brought to the table, and they are still surviving. The other one is multi-year wage agreements. We're currently on 5-year wage agreements, which is a new record in South Africa, meaning that for 5 years one has relative stability. It also has its weaknesses, but to a large extent I think one can say that the platinum belt has become a peaceful space in terms of industrial relations.
Nkome, if you could maybe, by addition, just take a few steps back to characterize precisely, particularly the pre 2012 16 August collective bargaining in reference, for instance, to unionization? What had failed such that workers had to resort to such a drastic measure?
When we received instructions on the 18th of August in 2012, which was on a Saturday, we were instructed by the clients that what necessitated them going directly to speak to the employer was the failure of their then union that was not able to address their needs insofar as increments in remuneration. The majority of the people that we represented were earning at the time per month 3,500 rands. And they were, despite the fact that they might have been working in that space for a period of more than 20 years. So it did not matter the length of service that you had given to the employer. All that you knew was that as a rock drill operator, per month you would be given an amount of 3,500. Now, what I think we also need to speak to is the fact that when we arrived at Marikana, we met up with Ozuza, Polade, as well as others, that had everybody else gathered at a site where we were supposed then to give them assistance insofar as finding out where people are arrested and what could have happened to those that had been shot. Everybody else had been speaking on the same tune. Now, fast forward, a commission was set up for the purpose of saying who is supposed to be found guilty for having caused the massacre. That caused a rift and that took a long time. Fast forward, with the result of the recommendations of that commission, we do not seem to have any implementation such that when you get to Marikana now, it's in squalor. The roads are in a bad state. There isn't any sewer collection. People are still living in shacks, even worse, more than they were living in prior to 2012, the massacre.
And Mamzondo, I don't know if you want to add to some of these points raised by Van Rensburg and Nkome in relation to the conditions that led the workers to take this drastic action.
Look, I mean, I think Andres and Ms. Van Rensburg are probably best placed because we asked for people who didn't work at the mine. Yes, many of them lived at Nkaneng with their partners, and they could share with us the conditions that they lived in while they were there. We all know that Lonmin had been allowed to get away with the obligations in terms of the social labor plans up to that point. And you know there was a recommendation from the commission that must be attended to. We know, of course, since then, I think the informal settlements around have remained very much the same. Even though there's been maybe creches and schools, there's been additional accommodation built for the workers, but the general community is still living in different difficult conditions. And I think that's part of, the conversation we need to have as a country about what it means for us to give anyone the right to mine minerals that belong to us, because that's what the Act says. It says the Act, those minerals belong to the country, to all of us. And then for them to be able to continue and live us in conditions like that.
If you've just joined us, Bantwana Benkosi, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, on Power 987. I'm on the line with the head of Organisational Development at AMCU, Krister Van Rensburg, and SERI Executive Director Nomzamo Zondo, as well as the mine workers attorney, specifically in the Marikana area, Ntate Andries Nkome. We are trying to memorialize the Marikana massacre to force our memories not to forget the tragedy of the day meted against by a democratic government against workers who were demanding a living wage. We continue the conversation right after the headlines. It's 10:30. We're going to take the headlines with Nyaka Lotef.
Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
We are still memorializing the Marikana massacre, Bantwana Benkosi, and this is Power Talk. If you would like to join this conversation, 0861987000, you can call through. I'm on the line with the head of Organisational Development at AMCU, Krister van Rensburg, Seri Executive Director Nomzamo Zondo, and the Marikana mine workers attorney, Andries Nkome. I'd like us to turn to the recommendations of the Farlam Commission to try and take stock if any of the recommendations 13 years down the line have had any fruit, any bearing, any practical implementation on the ground. We would all remember that in relation to South African police services, there was a finding that the operation was poorly planned, rushed, but also deeply flawed. In fact, they had ignored the basic approach of public order policing and went for what essentially was a killing unit. And the recommendation of the commission said that the NPA should conduct investigations, determine criminal liability of individual police officers. As broad as it's that, from the commissioner up to those who were taking orders. Let me start with you, Mr. van Rensburg. What do you have to say about this recommendation? Was it implemented? If so, how many police officers were convicted?
Yes. I want to start from a different angle, Dr. Ndlozi, and that is to say that sadly we haven't learned anything. You might recall, some of your panel might also know, in 2019 we had a strike in the gold sector, Sibanye Stillwater also, where you won't believe many of these similar tactics took place. It was clear that the South African Police Service was acting like a private security service of Neil Furneman, the CEO. Their vehicles were caught being serviced in the workshops of those gold mines, if you can believe that. But the worst thing for me personally was to see... Sorry?
Mr. van Rensburg?
There was a background noise there.
Yes.
It wasn't from my side. I'm saying the worst thing that we saw was, can you believe, razor wire? In the Free State, they used razor wire. They used fully armed police officers to try and intimidate our members. Now, fast forward, 2 years ago, late 2023, I myself personally was involved in the Gold One sit-in. You might remember what happened there. And exactly the same thing happened. We were there one day. I was scared for my life, I promise you, where you had uniformed, fully uniformed sniper police, assault rifles, with masks on.
Your call has been placed on hold. Please wait.
Sorry about that. It must be one of the panelists. But please proceed, Mr. van Rensburg.
All right. No, if I can just finish, to say that you had a total militarization of a labor relations dispute. I mean, it's exactly the same that happened in 2012. One can never utilize state resources to protect a private interest, because that's what it is. These mines are private interests. They're not public interests. They're private interests. For us to use the police and hard ammunition, real ammunition, to fight what is essentially a labor dispute, I think we've failed completely. Now, coming back to your issue of the NPA, there's no secret. I mean, nothing has happened. Nothing in that respect. I'm sure Andries will tell us as well about the prosecution part of it, the more legal part of it. But what I'm saying is for me, more important is the militarization of labor disputes in our country. Let's say of protests in general. The Farlam recommendations have not been taken into account at all from where I'm sitting. Thank you.
Let's hear Mr. Nkome. What's your assessment in relation to holding the police personnel up to the leadership in relation to this recommendation that there must be investigations to determine criminal liability?
Look, I think that these commissions that we tend to see, including the Farlam Commission, are pacifying drugs for agitated communities, simply because recommendations that we have seen come out of the Farlam Commission, for example, we haven't seen any of its recommendations implemented. It spoke largely to possible prosecution, and we've only seen prosecution of the affected mine workers, and we haven't seen any prosecution of the people that were affected. You would know that when we were at the Farlam Commission, there were video recordings that were made of the threats that were made by General Mpembe on the 13th particularly, where he was saying we are not going to count up until 1, but we are only giving you this opportunity for you to disperse. Now, the state only gave us up until when he counted, I think up until 4, and doesn't give us the whole picture of what transpired there. So, for the fact that the recordings as well as the evidence lies in the hands of the state, means we are far from getting to the bottom of what really transpired in Marikana. And I agree that we are supposed to have entities as well as organizations like AMCU that are saying we are willing to litigate and appeal the outcomes of the court so that we can then come to higher decision makers, say, for example, the Supreme Court of Appeal, where we are supposed to look into the evidence that was led in the Northwest High Court, as well as the outcomes that were arrived at. In our view, it's an unfair outcome. And we also have a very clear case of the death in the Kenta, which is of somebody that was shot, was arrested, put in the Kenta, and in transit going towards a police station, died there. So it cannot be that then the court cannot say nobody can be held liable for that death. So we are saying, for as long as people are willing to have their matters litigated and finalized in court, we will not have justice.
Yeah. Mam Zondo, your assessment of police prosecutions.
Look, I mean, I think Andres has intimated the 2 cases that came. First of all, IPID only started investigating after the commission ended. So there was at least 3 years that was lost. But by 2018, we had the first group of prosecutions in relation to Mr. Schalala, and then ultimately the 13th. And what I can say, because we followed the process very closely, because our clients wanted to have the front row of those prosecutions. And one, in terms of the small team, the 3 state advocates that were put in charge of the case, our clients could see that they were committed to the case, but the case is vast, right? Even the 2 cases that were before the court. So in terms of resources that were put together by the NPA towards Marikana, towards the criminal liability of the police, we are concerned and we remain concerned. Secondly, the fact that, of course, as we know, nothing has happened in relation to the deaths on the 16th, including Mr. Schalala's death, by the way. But then also the interesting thing is that there's nothing that's spoken about the charges against Lonmin Security, who injured the very first people on the I think it's the 11th of August, or the NUM officials who injured mine workers who were on strike on the 12th. Again, the silence on those prosecutions. And in as far as we think about the prosecutions, of course, we feel like there's been a heavy-handedness when it comes to the mine workers, and a very light touch when it comes to the police and when it comes to everybody else who's including Lonmin officials. And so our concern has been that the NPA has not treated our client's case with the necessary priority.
But what happened to Ria Pierre? Was her dismissal, are you able to speak to that, specifically if she was dismissed with pensions and benefits? What was her fate?
Look, I mean, I think I can't recall now, maybe Anders can recall better, but my recollection is that at the time that she left before she was discharged, even though there was a separate commission to look into her actions. And that commission also recommended discharge.
But what form of a discharge this is? Is it dishonorable discharge? Andries, are you able to help?
Indeed so, yes. Right after the Farlam Commission of Inquiry, a separate commission of inquiry was set to look into her fitness to hold office. Now, the Classing Commission of Inquiry said, we were part of it, and the outcomes was that she wasn't a fit person to have held office. And the matter was then referred back to the internal processes of the SAPS. So as to how the SAPS dealt with her exit from office, it's something now beyond me. But I understand and I know that the Classing Commission of Inquiry found her not to have been a fit candidate to have held the position at the time.
Okay, let's turn then to the recommendations regarding Lonmin itself. And there is something here about the review of the housing policy by Lonmin and an investigation into its failure to protect employees and its role in escalating tensions. Mr. van Rensburg, are you able to speak to us about this recommendation?
Yes, I have a bit of an update from our team on the housing commitment. The update I have, and I'm reading here from our report, it said that some of our hostel conversions have been completed. However, shockingly again, only 554 of the 2,658 pledged units have been delivered. So that means that, again, it's 13 years, and it's not even a quarter, a fifth, actually, of what was pledged.
And the failure of employees to be protected, what became of that? Did Lonmin hold its own employees into some form of accountability and hopefully then found them guilty that were and dismissed them? Are you able to address us about that?
Do you mean the disciplinary actions following the massacre?
Yes, like the failure on the part of Lonmin employees to protect the management, as it were, to protect the employees, to protect the workers.
Yes. Without going into details, according to all our reports, those disciplinary inquiries have all been finalized. All appeals have been dealt with as well at that point. Currently, as you know, it's not owned by Lonmin anymore. It's now Sibanye Stillwater.
Yes.
So the policy framework is that of Sibanye Stillwater.
Yeah. And Andries, there was something about the owners of Lonmin at the time and some of the key shareholders and directors not even residing in South Africa. And I guess in this case, there's something to be said as well about Mr. Ramaphosa, who was in the board at the time. Can you address us? Because it would seem to me further investigation into Lonmin's failure to protect employees and its role in escalating tensions. Mr. Ramaphosa's email as a director should have had a further investigation as far as this recommendation is concerned. Am I correct?
Indeed so, yes. Our argument in front of the Farlam Commission, which did not hold with Judge Farlam, is that Mr. Ramaphosa was a director of Lonmin. He held shares within Lonmin, and he was also an NEC member of the ruling party. So it was as a result of that position that he occupied that he was able to exert pressure on government to go and ill-treat laborers in the privately held mining interests that were out in Marikana. Fast forward, we know that Lonmin has been sold over to Sibanye, and many others, in as much as are now blaming Lonmin for what transpired. They are saying Sibanye is not a godly entity, but it's far worse compared to what had happened in Marikana in the hands of Lonmin.
Ms. Zondo?
Look, I think it's frustrating, I think, to see how Lonmin has not accounted for having failed to protect their staff, and in both striking and non-striking staff. I think the one thing that did come out of it, which we respect, is the fact that there was compensation that was paid to the families that are outside those who were killed by the police. That came from Sibanye Stillwater, and that compensation was paid after facilitation, I think, by one of the foundations. And in fact, in conversations, we were initially approached by Sibanye saying, we don't know were these families not compensated? And we were taken back to the Commission's report to say, well, we understand that maybe you are the new sheriff in town, but here is what the report finds about the actions of lawmen, how it was lawmen who put those employees' lives in danger. And we think if there's an issue about the compensation of those families, you are the people who should deal with it. And it did take, I think, a year or two, but then ultimately they were compensated by Sibanye Stillwater.
Mr. van Rensburg, are you maybe then, because some of the parts relate to the union, National Union of Mine Workers, AMCU. How are the relations at this stage, particularly on the ground, between the two unions?
Yes, the relations between AMCU and NUM, I think, has improved greatly over the years. That same gold strike that I referred to earlier, and the previous gold strike actually saw that AMCU and NUM work together.
Yeah.
And on many labor disputes, especially in the platinum sector around the ESOPs at Kroondal, for instance, which is also operation of Sibanye Stillwater, there was a great level of collaboration between the unions. The relationship is strong, very civil. We speak often. We often caucus together. The same happened in gold. Currently, we're busy with wage negotiations in gold. So I think the level of inter-union rivalry, I think, is not what it was then. But I want to also emphasize, Dr. Ndlozi, that this issue of inter-union rivalry has been blown out of proportion by many media houses as well at the time to try and shift the blame away from what happened to blame the workers for what happened on 16 August, and that's completely wrong. This was not an issue of inter-union rivalry. Remember, we shot the 34. It was not NUM who shot AMCU, AMCU shot NUM. It was the police.
Yes.
Who shot workers. And we often have to remind people that those comrades on the copy that day were not AMCU members or NUM members. They were workers.
Yes.
In fact, most of them were not AMCU members yet. At that time, AMCU had a small number of workers at Korea only, at one of the shafts. So there's a big misperception. If you ask most people on the street, you'll see that they have a misperception that the Marikana massacre was when the unions killed each other. And that is something we must please try and change that
dispute,
narrative.
yes.
That is not what happened.
Andres, isn't it also true that often because of the email, Ramaphosa overshadows other important names of people that actually were in the state at the time, that were in charge of the final decision-making process, that could have ignored or that could have taken a different type of concomitant action other than killing and massacring workers. The names, for instance, of Nadim Tetwa, who was at the time the Minister of Police, Susan Shabangu, Minerals and Energy Minister, and President Zuma as the presiding president at the time. When one thinks of Bipatung massacre, the name is the name of de Klerk. When one thinks about the Sharpeville massacre, we think of presidents of the time. Isn't it true that the name of Ramaphosa is blown out of proportion at times to hide the true people that were responsible at the time, the highest of which was President Zuma?
Our argument has always been that the entire nation saw people that pulled the trigger, and we are supposed then to have those prosecuted. But also we know that prior to them pulling the trigger, there was a press briefing that was made by the Provincial Police Commissioner, and we can detail as to what transpired within the weeks, including what transpired on the 13th, when Mpembe was leading the charge, what transpired on the 12th, when the lawmen security personnel were going all out and assaulting and firing at people. We also have been able to detail in front of the Farlam Commission the telephonic discussions as well as the emails that went to and fro between the then Deputy President as well as the Minister of Police as well as the Minister of Mineral Resources. And we are
the then Deputy President being Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe.
The then Deputy President being Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa.
Well, he was still an NEC member.
Correct, yes.
Yes.
Yes, and then we are able then to say, over and above all of this, I said earlier that commissions have been set up essentially as a tranquilizing drug. We have been able to see that the then President Jacob Zuma set up a commission of inquiry led by Judge Farlam, the retired Judge Farlam, where he set out terms of reference that separated the interests of the people that we represented. Essentially, he was saying those that were arrested for causing the death of those that passed on. But we understand that it's very bizarre. Something like this cannot be simply because both of these people set out to go and fight for their own personal interests against the employer for better wages. So there was no way in which they could have gone out to try and harm one another when they were fighting against the same enemy. So the conclusion that you arrived at is correct to say that the then president ought to have known better and ought to have decided differently and made better decisions insofar as how to handle the situation in Marikana.
Ms. Zondo?
I agree with Andres, and I think this issue of who is seen publicly as responsible for Marikana is one that we are losing also as the time passes. For some of us, we remember how ferociously President Zuma fought not to provide the very report of the Farlam Commission to the families and the mine workers. They litigated to force him to release that report. The treatment of the families during his presidency it leaves very little bit to be desired. When we think about the directors at Lomin at the time, no one even remembers their names, right? Because they've been shouldered, because their names that come up every now and again, and they are kind of are written at the very as a footnotes of history. And I think for our clients, I think continuously they want to see one not only the criminal prosecutions of everyone was involved, but they also want to see a reform of the police. They also want to see change as in Sibanye itself, even how Sibanye itself now as a new owner of the Lonmin Mine Act. And in the conversation around the reform of the police, what the panel of experts did, firstly, to try and provide recommendations for how the police can change. Two, the fact that it took years before that report was released, and it was only released because, unfortunately, the late Mthokozi Ntumba was murdered by the police in Braamfontein again in full view of the public. And only at that time we got that panel of experts report released. And in 2022, again, the police wrote into the national instruction the recommendations made by that panel of experts. But the real question is it being implemented? Are police abiding by that national instruction? Do we not have the same concerns that people who are injured by police can die from bleeding to death? Do we not have the same concerns that, again, would have operations that are badly planned, badly executed, and lives lost?
Indeed. Mr. van Rensburg, I don't know if you want to say anything with regards to the high profile and powerful politicians beyond Ramaphosa that were in charge of the state at the time, in as much as his email called for concomitant action, but somebody responded.
Yes, now please, thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. You know, AMCU has consistently demanded that no politician in our country should have business interests because it avoids that will avoid conflicts of interest. This was a clear conflict of interest. One can ask yourself that if these ministers and deputies at the time did not have shares and financial interest in these mines, would the same outcome have happened? Would you have had a multi-provincial police deployment? Choppers, Caspers, all over the place. The amount of resources, I wonder what was the budget allocation of SAPS during that period. And you must ask yourself, all of us as taxpayers, is it fair that our tax-paying money is being utilized to protect the private interest of a powerful individual or individuals, if you call it that way? Yeah. And that is completely, completely wrong. It shouldn't happen in any country. And for it to happen in a post-oppressive reality like ours, as I said earlier, the point about the nation being betrayed by the ANC, then one must ask yourself, isn't it even worse that our own are sacrificing us for their own personal interest? It's very serious. You made the point earlier about concomitant action. You might know, Dr. Ndlozi, it sounds like you know, that ironically on the 15th, the same day as we are today, that this so-called national dialogue is kicking off. Was the same time that that email was sent to say that concomitant action must be taken by the person in a position of extreme power, both financially and politically, to protect his interests and those of his handlers. And it's just brushed under the carpet. The insult of having this national dialogue kick off, everybody's withdrawing, by the way, we are very glad to hear that. But of it kicking off on this day and then also continuing tomorrow and trying to drown out the little bit of relevance that we as AMCU and other organizations want to bring to this event, this commemoration of a horrific point of in our history, is being drawn away. It's completely, it's unforgivable. It's really, really, really something that we need to look at. It is I think in a sense, it is a microcosm of the rot that we see in our country, where politicians let their personal interests, their family's wealth, stand before the nation and the empowerment of the downtrodden and the poor.
Mr. Christine Janse van Rensburg, the head of Organizational Development at AMCU, Sarah Executive Director Nomzamo Zondo, and attorney mine workers in Marikana, Andres Ngome. Thank you all for creating time to speak to us, and long live to the Marikana workers.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.